Welcome to Merely Human. I'm Jeffrey Adordor, licensed marriage and family therapist. This podcast offers practical wisdom through the stories and insights gained from decades of providing mental health services and therapy. This is episode number 1, The Unexamined Life. I want to tell you a bit about myself and share a story that illustrates the value of therapy. Years ago, I figured out I had a certain effect on people. I'd find myself on a bus or on an airplane, and the general public just seemed to open up to me. And again, I'd be sitting next to someone, and the next thing I know, they'd be talking about their personal life and intimate details and struggles. I suppose they found my personality safe and present. And after a while, I just realized I had something, this kind of personality trait, and maybe I could do something with it. So I focused my intention. Going back to school, I received a master's degree and went through the proper channels and steps to become a licensed marriage and family therapist. So during the course of 20 years working in mental health, I've served hundreds and even thousands of people from all walks of life. I've heard countless stories that reflect all different aspects of humanity. This is a story about one particular encounter. Roughly 10 years ago, I met a man. He was in his mid-60s. And on this particular day one, he hit me with quite an existential challenge. Let's call this man John for good measure. John came into my office. He was the corporate executive type. He was wearing a fancy suit, but his clothes looked as though he had been sleeping in them, wrinkled. Honestly, I forget what industry John shared that he was into, but I quickly got the picture that he was accustomed to wealth. He sat down, and shortly after I closed the door, John laid the weight of his world upon me. With an expression on his face, much like having seen a ghost, he looked down at the floor and with low tones stated, "I was recently diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the prognosis is at best 1 year to live." However, that did not reflect the entire weight of what was on his shoulders. John looked up at me and he changed his tone, and in a more commanding way, he said, "I'm going to die soon, and I want you to fix my family." He continued, I have adult children, and they all seem to hate each other. I'm afraid that when I die, they're just going to fight over all the inheritance and wealth that I worked so hard for." I sat in silence. At that point in my career, I'd had a fair amount of experience. I was rarely shaken by what clients revealed to me. However, this one definitely shook my foundation. I sat and reflected on his words. My internal dialogue was honestly like, holy shit. This was a powerful and honest disclosure. There's no textbook answer to such a personal disclosure. There's no cliche response for such a moment. This guy also wasn't the kind of touchy-feely guy that just needed emotional validation. John was genuinely fixed on the idea that I could ultimately repair this man's legacy, and as soon as possible. I had to respond with all due respect. So it just so happened that the following weekend to this conversation with John, I had this epic rafting and kayak adventure. I love outdoors, everything outdoors, and so it's common for me and my family to get outside. Well, my best instincts guided me to tell him this story as a substantive response in order to begin our therapeutic journey together. I told him the following. I was whitewater rafting with my family and some friends on the American River. It was was a several-hour day paddle, class 3, class 4 rapids, which was a moderate to difficult rafting whitewater scale. When you get up into the class 5 and 6, it becomes deadly and unpassable, so it gives you an idea. Well, towards the end of the day, this paddle, I opted to challenge my skill a little bit and hopped into one of the inflatable kayaks that we had been paddling along with us. And I had experience with kayaking. It had been a while, and I thought I could do it. Yet this was class 3 pushing class 4, and the inflatable kayak was less than desirable, not exactly what you'd call sporty. I went for it anyway. My family went ahead of me, leading the way through this 100-yard stretch of rapids with an intimidating name, Satan's Cesspool. I don't know who names these things. The rapids began with this huge wave that dipped and rose well overhead and continued for a half a dozen similar-sized waves in a straight line. They call these things wave trains. I paddled confidently straight ahead with all my strength. The first wave just laughed at my inflatable kayak. And like I was on a bucking bronco, I was tossed back into the air, and I landed perfectly into the strongest part of this massive tumbling hydraulic rapid. And I was immediately sucked down to the bottom of the river. I grew up with water sports. I played water polo. I swam competitively through college. I also enjoyed scuba diving, free diving, and surfing a bit. So I had plenty of experience with the element of water in various forms. Yet this was like nothing I had experienced before. The intensity of the river was so immense. The hydraulics were so powerful with the sheer volume of water that even with a life vest, I was just bouncing off the bottom. I remember looking up through the cold blue water and seeing sunlight far above me. I estimated I was roughly like 20 to 30 feet underwater. My best instincts led me not to panic, to do my best to relax and just simply hold. Although I was mostly terrified, there was also something strangely beautiful about the experience. I centered myself in the midst of all this chaos, and I held my breath. I knew that fighting was pointless. I would only exhaust my precious oxygen reserves, putting myself in greater danger of drowning. I remember my lungs burning, but I did my best just to stay relaxed. And I rode that whole 100-yard wave train completely underwater, with my body twisting and rolling until I was finally pushed to the surface. My family and my rafting companions were visibly shaken, yet relieved to see me. They helped me climb back into the safety of the raft. They told me I was underwater for 3 to 4 minutes. So as I told John this story, I think he sensed the undercurrent of what I was saying. I was not attempting to match his story for what I considered a near-death experience. My scary moment most likely represented only a fraction of the fear that John was facing. My aim was to help him not panic and to face his reality honestly. I could tell that John was the kind of man that was used to giving directives. He was used to giving directives and getting prompt results. However, it would have been ignorant for me to say, yeah, sure, John, no problem. I'll fix your family. Let's go. I needed to first frame my reply with a sense of realism while I attempted to take on the gravity of the situation. Without sounding pessimistic, I wanted John to get the point that no matter how much he may have desired to control the outcome, he most likely had to surrender to a power greater than him. And I sensed that this was John's biggest fear: losing control. From that first session, I must have earned John's respect, as he did return for several counseling sessions. John tried several times to convince his 3 children to meet together in order to talk things through, yet only one of the 3 children was willing to counsel. One of his sons did attend a few sessions and presented with compassion and the intent to support his father's dying wishes. And there was some peace there. John found some understanding and some peace with his son. However, the other 2 adult children were locked in a position of contempt and conflict. They would simply not enter into the conversation, let alone the room with one another. The relational patterns in John's family were the result of decades of programming. It's not like you can just fix that ASAP. Most of the therapeutic focus with John was best allocated to helping him find peace in the final season of his life, regardless of things not going as planned. Throughout our meetings, John's tone of urgency evolved to contentment, in between lamenting tones of regret. When people are facing death, they rarely care about the worldly things that most of us fret upon. John lamented most about time lost and wishing he had been more present and considerate to the people that meant the most to him. I had roughly 6 months working with John, and then he disappeared. As a therapist, it's inevitable to meet clients like John, and their story echoes and fades into mystery. This story is not just about a testimonial of the power of therapy, as much as it is a story of an unexamined life. I heard it once said that there are 3 great powers in the world: the power of the sword to protect what you love, the power of the gem to survive and thrive, and the power of the mirror to know thyself. And all 3 powers are essential to being the best version of yourself. Yet many people do not place much importance on the latter. If we do not consistently look at ourselves in the mirror throughout our life, we will not know ourselves, know the things that scare us, know the things that we might avoid, our blind sides, our broken pieces, our shadows, our secrets. The unexamined life is a life of ignorance. Some might say that ignorance is bliss. Maybe. But far too often, it's the root of our suffering. So how can we grow as people if we don't know our weaknesses? And at the same time, how do we know our strengths if we don't know ourselves? We have to look in the mirror throughout all the seasons of our life. For John, the existential crisis of death was laid upon him. Arguably, no one's ready for that completely. Yet, I can't help but think that had John valued self-reflection or perhaps even therapy early in his life, he would have been much better equipped to navigate through the chaos. And like so many people, John placed greater value on developing his career and accumulating resources and wealth. That doesn't make him a bad person. It just means he wasn't truly rich from the perspective of having meaningful relationships with his children or family. Perhaps if John had spent more time getting to know himself, he would have adjusted his work-life balance and made himself more available to guide his children, fostering love and connecting. Even if John could escape his fate, a terminal illness, perhaps he would have found more peace, knowing that his kids valued each other more. Then they valued material possessions and wealth, which was his primary legacy. When it comes down to it, I'm truly grateful to have met John and to have played a role, however small, in helping him find some peace in his final days. Encounters like this leave an indelible mark on my soul. And to be honest, in quiet moments, I sometimes cry for these people. I exhale the tears that represent the broken pieces of humanity. Sometimes I have people tell me that they couldn't even imagine doing what I do. And my reply, I love doing what I do. There's a pay beyond the pay. And I'm honored to help people be the best version of themselves, regardless of their challenges. There are so many stories, and I see myself a little bit in each one of them. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode of Merely Human. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please share the good word. This is a new project I'm cooking up. I intend on having interviews with other paraprofessionals in mental health and wellness field, all revolving around mental, emotional, and relational health. So until next time, take care.